Yes. Yes, so you can have the head. And what will go inside the head? Oh, we already know this, so let's not spend too much time. What will go inside the head? Anyone?
I think what will go in is the employee form.
Okay. So okay, this was Kenneth's message. Yeah, so we say that we put a title here. So the
Can you
title
hear
is
me, please?
yeah, McAfee, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we said the title will go here. So the title is employee form. And we said the title is not, the things in the head are not things you see in the page. So for example, you see the way in this tab, you have employee.html. Usually when you go into your browser, you have the same thing here. So the head we put there that is what will go in the head. Okay. Now, after we've done the head, what do we do next?
Come to the body.
Okay. So then we do
That is the form.
Okay, so now that we've done the body, now we can actually start writing out our HTML. So again, this is the template. Always you do this before you start writing your code. So again, we said this is the heading, so we can make it an H1. So employee survey interest form. Okay, so we can save that. Okay, so now the next thing we see is we see this box, which allows you to type something in. In HTML, we have an element that allows us to do that. It's called an input. So what an input allows us to do is that an input allows us to fill in things. There are different types of inputs, but the one we need right now is one for text, because what we are going to write is text. So when we save this, if we open it in our browser, and I'm sharing my whole screen, so you guys should see. If we open it, we see, can we all see the box?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so we see that.
Please.
Yeah, we see the box that allows us to type. So that is an input. So inputs are for taking in inputs from users. So if you want your users to give you things, you use an input element. So for example, if you wanted them to enter their email address, things like that. Now there's one other thing which is called a label. And if we, in this example, we see that they have this thing, enter your name. So labels are just how you want to label your input. So there's an element called label. Yeah. Label. So label is essentially, and we'll talk about this attribute later. Label is essentially how you want to title it. So here, let's say we want to title it first name. So if we save it as first name, if we go back into our browser, we see that it has first name. Does it make sense?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So again, just to reiterate, inputs are for taking inputs from users. There are different types of inputs. And whilst we're working on this example, we'll go through all the users. So label is just how you want your input to be called. And you see it here that now we are saying that this box is for first name. Okay. The next thing we want to see is we see another entire department. So this, what is this? What element will we use for this? The entire department.
Also another label.
Okay, so we'll do a label. Now, just so that, like we're saying, just so that our code is not all about, let's put all that in a section. So we have one label. Then we can have another label. We can have another label. And one thing to note that when I give space like this, it doesn't really matter. If I go into my code and I refresh, those spaces won't show. So those spaces don't matter. It's just usually for you to see how your code is structured, just so that for your own eyes you can see. But spaces and things don't matter. You actually have to code out your space. So we have another label, which is enter your department. Okay. And then after enter your department, we see a box that is taking our input. So what element will we use for something like this? What will we use for this? Makafu, please go on.
I actually have a question
Oh, please ask.
about the code.
Okay, please ask.
Yeah. So we put the the body of the form into a section, and then under the section we have the label. But for the next line, we have inputs, and then we have a label again. I'm confused about that.
Okay.
Why can't we have inputs for all of them or label for all of them?
Okay, so you can, and if, okay, just to, let me restate your question just to understand it, just to know if I understand. So you're asking why we have different labels for everything. Makafu, am I quoting?
Label.
Okay, so if we go back into our code, so we're saying that for labels, they are just for this input. So usually if I was writing something like this, again, just because of structure, we spoke about diffs, and I mean, we said diffs are also structural elements, but those ones, they don't really have, we just use them for styling. So they are like sections, but we just use them for styling. So what I would have done is I would have put this in a div just so that I'm separating everything so that it's not like all of them are together. So I would cut this one too. And then I would put it here. So just so that everything is like separate and I'm not like putting everything together because they are all different things. So this is for this is for first name, this is for department. Then if we had another one, we would separate them. So they are all different. The reason we are separating them is that they are all for different things. We are not taking the same data for all of them. One is for department, one is for first name. Like you see here. So this is the label for it. This is the input. This is the label for it. This is the input. This is the label for it. This is the input. I don't know if you do understand. Do you understand?
Currently, yes.
Okay, so the reason we have different labels for all is that they are all different things. So this label is just for this one. Yeah, I mean, just so that we are not confused, I'll take off the diffs. But just know that, just know that
I
the
have
reason,
a question.
please go
Okay,
on,
sorry.
please go on.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask why when you did the label for the first name, you didn't put any attributes, but for the entire department, you put the for equal to sort of attributes there.
Okay, so I mean, I took care of the first one because I didn't want to confuse you, but the four attributes is just usually like what I using it for. So I mean, I could type department here. And it's all for semantic reasons, just so for your browser, all those things. But I mean, you could equally take it off and it should still work. Nothing will change. So the four is just an attribute, like we said, attributes, they give more information about the element. So the four is just essentially what am I using it for? So I mean, I could say the department name as my four. That's the only reason that four is there. I took it off just so that, I mean, we can understand the elements first before all the attributes become confusing. Now the inputs, the reason we have an attribute for it, which is text, is that for inputs, there are so many ways you can do inputs. Like, for example, we're talking about how something, when you go on a website, they ask you to mark something or you can select. So you actually have to specify what type of input you want. And for this one, we want people to be able to put in text. You could equally, and all these things, there are so many inputs that I don't expect you to have them all offered, but you could also equally do number. And it means that the kind of information you require is a number. So if I try to, it will just give me numbers. So there are different types of inputs. So the reason we specify the type is just so that the browser knows what kind of information we require from that. Please, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one is, what would we say this is? Tell us a little about yourself.
That's also a label.
Okay. Tell us about yourself. Okay. And then the difference is that, as you can see, this one is bigger. So usually if you go on websites, you see some of them, they allow you to type like longer things. Like if you have to write a cover letter, you have to do things. The difference between this is that this is more of a text area. So it's a place that you can type. And conveniently, there's an HTML element called text area. And forget all these extra things. But conveniently, there's one called text area. And what text area allows you to do is that if you need to give your user a big space to type, you have one text area so that they can type as much as they want as compared to a smaller input. So it's still the same things. Now, I mean, I would have to explain something, but I'll put I'll wrap all these things in a div so that they'll just go to a different line. But then I won't talk about it right now so that it's not confusing. Okay, but so far, do we understand? And so far, the only things we are talking about is we are talking about inputs. We've spoken about inputs. We've spoken about labels. There are a few more inputs in this code. So we have this one, do exercise at home. Again, we would say it's a label. So and guys, is the code, is it, can you see, is it becoming confusing? Should I zoom in?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Please zoom in.
Okay.
Okay. So
sorry,
go on.
just to be clear,
Mhm.
you use the text area mainly for the bigger text space because they will take in more words.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the main difference between inputs and text areas is inputs and text areas are all for letting user type stuff. So if you want your user to type stuff, you use one of those. But if you want like more text, you want them to type more text or whichever information requires more words, you would use a text area because text areas are bigger. I mean, you can specify how wide and long you want it to be, but text areas are bigger than just regular inputs. Regular inputs are small.
Is there a text limit for the input?
There's no text limit, but then it gets to a point where the text starts to scroll. So, I mean, you can't see the things.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't
Yeah,
see the
okay.
things here. So usually, most times you use this for like emails, passwords, things like that. And also conveniently, if you want to take passwords from users, you see usually when you type your password, people can't see, it doesn't show. Conveniently, there's one for password. So that when I go, and all these ones are things that you can explain. I mean, you don't have to know all of them off it. Like I said, if you are using one or you're trying to find which one to use, always go to the MDN. So, I mean, if I was trying to I'll do password HTML MDN. It'll tell me that I should. So like it says, if I want to do password, I should use the input type password. So always go to the MDN. You almost always find, if you're looking for something that you don't know, for example, see this, there are so many other input types. There's one for date, there's some for email, there's some for files if you want to upload a file, there's some for numbers, there's some for range, there's some for set. So there are so many, you don't have to know all, but there will come times when you're trying to use a particular one and you don't know. So you just go to the MDN and check if they have an input for it. So for example, I changed this to password. Which one did I change to password? Okay, I have to refresh my page. So I changed this one to password. So now you see that when I type, it doesn't show. It shows as though it's a password. So there are so many other input types that you can check. I mean, you don't have to know all of them right now in your head. Like I go to the MDN all the time. if I'm doing stuff and I don't know how to do. So for example, we have this one. So I guess I'll leave the rest for us to complete. So I mean, again, we say when we give assignments, it's due a week later. So it's not due on Saturday, it's due next week, Tuesday. But then you go to the MDN, you find which input element you can use to do like a checkbox. You can find which one you can use to select options. And then you can find how to do like a button, a submit button. So I'll email this so that we can all do it. We have 17 more minutes, but if anybody has any questions, you can ask. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
just another question about the text area.
Okay, please ask.
So you see with the previous ones, we had input type and we defined that it was for a text. But then with the one that we just put text area, is it sort of like, it's just automatic that it knows that it's like a text area, so we don't have to define the nature of the input?
Yeah, so for text area, it's just for text. So you don't have to define what kind of data you be getting, because it's just for text. The reason why we specify for inputs is that for inputs, there are so many things that you could potentially be getting back, like we saw. It could be a number, it could be a password, it could be so many other things. So we actually have to specify, because like we said, your computer or your browser doesn't know what to do until you tell it what to do. So then if it is input, we have to tell it that this is the kind of inputs that we want. We want our input to be text. We want our input to be a number. And then, so let me just quickly try and show you something. If I added a button, I mean, I'm already showing how to do a button, but if I added a button, or let me just do like an input. So there's an input, which is submit. If I do a submit and forget everything, I just want to show you something. For example, if I change this to number, and I go back into my browser and I try to, let me refresh. Always, like we said, if you make changes, refresh the page, else it won't take on the new changes. So you'll be wondering why the thing you saved is not working. It's usually because you've not saved. But if I do, let me just add. So if I change it to number, now the reason why it's important to give an input, what type of data you want back is this. If I change this to maybe hello, and I try to save. Oh, my button is not working. Let me just use a button. Okay. Okay, so if I come back here, if I, as always, when you make changes, refresh, then I do name, Thomas. Then here is supposed to be a number, but let's say I type TN. Then here is supposed to be, tell me about yourself. I wish I knew. If I try to submit, I mean, I think I have to do this, but if I try to submit, it will tell me that this requires a number. So then it won't, so like you see, it tells me, please enter a number, because then that's the type of input. So that's like one of the ways of like filtering the information so that your user won't like come and give you wrong information, or they won't use the information you type. I mean, there are ways that you can like style this thing so that it will look better, but then it's telling me to actually type a number. So I have to actually put in a number before then it will go through. So that's why you set the type for the input you want. Yeah, I'm Makafu. I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, please, I've texted it in chat.
Okay, so how do I find it in the browser, the code I mean? So earlier we said that I mean, the way we said you could do it was you can hold it like this, open your browser, drag it inside it, then it opens, but that can be very tedious. So what you can do is if you come here in your VS Code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, option number 5, there's something called extension. So when you open extension, search for open in browser. If you search for open in browser, install this one. Install this one, open in browser by Teke. What it allows you to do is that when you right click, you see open in browser. So you can just select either your default browser or whichever browser. It's much easier than having to drag it into your browser. So that's how you get the code into your browser. And then whenever you make a change in your browser, you just refresh so that it takes on the new chain. I mean, very later on, we'll show you how to set it up so that whenever you make a change, it's automatic. Yeah.
All right.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there's a hack for figuring out what features to use. For instance, when to use a section, because you mentioned that every developer is going to have a different approach to the section, the whole thing. So I wanted to find out if they hack to figuring out how to do it, or haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, so I'll just share that part of the slides again so that we can quickly talk through it. And we have 11 minutes, don't worry, we'll close on time. So like I'm saying, it's right now, it's not very intuitive that you know that I should use a section or I should use a main. One sec. Yeah, but then the main thing you want to know is that the header is for the top part of your page. So if you're looking at like your navigation, introductory text, those things go into your header. Use a nav for like links. So for example, if you can see, I've opened up Canva, all these things are navigation items. So I'll put that in the nav. For your main, we said that the main is, and let me make this full. We said that the main is for like the primary thing, the most dominant thing in your page. And afterwards, I'll just open a random website and we can go through and try and identify. And then we said a section, we'll use a section if we're trying to group content that is like related. So for example, in our BBC thing, we saw that the top part, it was mainly headlines. So it was like Kamala Harris, Achua had died, things like that. Those are the headlines. So all those things are similar because it's headlines. So we'll wrap all those things in a section, then each individual news item in a section. The reason we're wrapping all of them, we are making their parent a section is because they are sort of interrelated because they are all headlines. So then in those instances, we know that we'll use a section. Then we spoke about like articles. We said articles are things you can share individually. So it's just that right now, the main things you need to know is that I'll use a section if like all the elements are sort of interrelated. So if I group them together and it makes sense, I would use a section. If I group them together, if I'm trying to group them together and it doesn't really make sense, maybe I'll use a div because even though they don't make sense, I still want to group them together for maybe because I want to style them and make all of them color blue. So it makes sense to like put them together. So I use like a div. But then semantically, if I'm grouping them together based on how related the content is, I use a section. If it's just on the side of the page or like some ad or something, I'll use like an aside. So, I mean, that's how you start to think of it, but eventually it starts to like make sense that, oh, in this instance, let me use an aside. In this instance, let me use like a section. So it's one of those things that come, but just if you're looking for like a hack, just know that like I use a section if the content is related. Like, so for example, always think of like headlines. So if I have like 5 headlines, I'll group all of them in one section. Things like that, yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Any more questions? Okay, so that is the things we wanted to cover. So just to recap, let me share my screen again, just to recap the things that we've gone over today. I mean, again, we spoke about elements. We said that elements, they define how our content is structured or how our content appears. We spoke about how we can think of elements in two ways. We can think of text-based elements. So text-based elements is really for how our text is. So if we have headings, if we have paragraphs, things like that will be text-based. Then we said we have other elements, which is mainly for structure. So how we want to group content together, how we want to position content, we use structure-based elements. So we have like the header, the nav, the main, and we try to remember that the header and the head is not the same thing. They are two different things. The header is for the things that appears like for information for your browser. So it's not things that you see. And the head is things that appears at the top of your page. Yeah, so these are the structural-based elements. We also, in the last part, we looked at some new elements. We looked at the inputs. We looked at text-based inputs. We looked at text area. We looked at ones for password. Right now, it's so many things. We are learning so many new things that you probably didn't know, probably haven't heard about. So it's totally fine if it is confusing us, like it's bubbling around in your head so much. What you want to do is you want to take time. I'll try and put up this video maybe by tomorrow. I mean, the good thing about watching the video is if I talk too slow, you can speed me up like 2 times speed so that you get through quickly, but you can watch the video again. Also, I'll assign some materials just to supplement this, like try and read, try and watch, just so that it starts to make sense. What we're trying to do is we're trying to use them to build as we go. So there's not like things that you have, but you don't know when to use them. So for example, that's why we've learned the input. We're going to try and build out the survey form so that we know how to use inputs. Right now in our minds, we know that then one of the instances we'll try to use those inputs is like if we want a user to log in. So we need like their email, password, things like that. So, I mean, it's fine if everything doesn't make sense, sleep over it, wake up tomorrow, stay consistent, try and go over it. As usual, if you have any questions, please put it on the page. Hopefully somebody can answer. And just one last thing, I'll just share my screen briefly. I'm already sharing my screen. Okay, so the way I saw that some of you, can you see my screen? Can you see my browser?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so some of you were emailing me your HTML file. That is I'm sure that is tedious for you. So what you can do is if you want to share your code or you want any of us to look over your code, go to CodePen. It's very easy to use and I'll just like quickly show you. So when you go on CodePen, I mean, if you don't have an account, create an account. If you create an account, it will bring you here. If you come on your left, you see pen. So click on pen. If you click on pen, it just opens up a window for you to be able to put HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So for example, if I copy the code we just wrote and I put it here, if I copy the code and I put it here, it automatically like generates like what I was doing. And then it becomes easy to share because I can just like copy my pen link and like send it to you, so that anybody can also open it and like just look on it quickly without having to like go into VS Code. So, I mean, for the homework and stuff, we'll just put our work in CodePen and just share it. I mean, eventually, when we get further, we'll look at GitHub and things like that. But for now, just go to CodePen, just copy and paste your code here. You can rename it if you want to form. Then you can share it. Yeah, so that's how we'll share our code. I mean, then it's also easy for me to like quickly just open in my browser and see like any change I can make, rather than you having to like upload your file to your email and send it to me. Then I have to download and open it in VS Code and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you have any questions, code related, just put your code here, share it on the page. Anybody can take a look at it and help you figure it out. Yeah. So 3 minutes. Yeah. But thank you all for joining today. Before we run out, I hope we learned something. I hope we learned something. And I mean, we're still very early. This is 2 classes. So I mean, if everything doesn't make sense, it's totally fine. Sometimes it just takes time. Amma, please, you have a question? Okay. Yeah. So it takes time. Kwabna, please go on.
Yes, please, my question. I'm using phone. Can I install and do the work?
So that you can't use VS Code on your phone. You can use VS Code on your laptop, but then there are some IDEs. So IDEs are essentially the environment in which you write code, but there are some IDEs that you can use for your phone. Yeah, I'll just type it in the chat. So you can find Replit either in the Play Store or Android, Play Store or like Apple Store. You can find Replit. It's like obviously it's harder to write code on your phone, but I mean for now you can use Replit on your phone. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've typed it in chat, so you can just find it in your Play Store and download it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. So thank you everyone for joining. As usual, if you have any questions, please ask on the page, and I'll see you all on Saturday, God willing. So have a wonderful evening and take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.